Welcome to the system architecture of the human soul. Before we can understand the hack, and before we can understand the virus that nearly wiped us out, we have to understand the machine itself. We need to look at the very beginning, Genesis. Most people read the creation story as poetry. They see a garden, a snake, an apple. But if you look at it through the eyes of an engineer, you stop seeing a fairy tale. You start seeing a technical manual. In the beginning, the text says that God created man in his own image. In theology, they call this the imago Dei. But in engineering, we have a different term for this. We call it the golden master. Think about how software is built. Before you release a program to the public, you create one perfect, flawless copy. It has no bugs, it has no errors, the code is clean. This is the source from which all other copies are made. Adam was that golden master. When the ancient texts describe the formation of man, they describe a process of assembly, dust from the ground. That is the hardware, the chassis, the carbon, the calcium, the iron. But hardware does not work without an operating system. So the text says, God breathed the breath of life into him. This was the activation sequence. The moment the power button was pressed, the moment the hardware connected to the cloud, and running inside the cells of this first human was a code so complex, we are still trying to decrypt it today. We call it DNA. Have you ever really looked at DNA? It is a language. It has a 4-character alphabet, A, C, T, and G. It reads like a program. It executes commands. It builds structures. It repairs errors. In the days of Eden, this code was pristine. There were no genetic defects, no cancer, no aging. The telomeres, the little protective caps at the end of your chromosomes that control aging, they did not degrade. The system was designed to run forever. This is what we call the kernel, the core code of humanity. Why did the Creator build it this way? Why write such complex code? Because this vessel was designed for a specific purpose. It was the only hardware in the known universe capable of housing the Spirit of God. It was a bidirectional interface between the physical dimension and the spiritual dimension. The angels do not have this. The animals do not have this. Only the human source code allowed for this specific frequency of connection. And that is where the danger begins. You see, in the world of cybersecurity, nobody wastes time hacking a system that has no value. You only hack the mainframe. You only hack the bank. You only target the code that holds the power. The human genome was the most valuable intellectual property in the universe. It was the proprietary technology of heaven, and because it was perfect, it became a target. Somewhere in the hidden history of the cosmos, a decision was made by a rival group of administrators to not just damage the hardware, but to rewrite the code entirely, to inject a malware so deep it would ruin the project forever. Let's look at the breach. We move now to the moment the firewall was breached. Genesis chapter 6. If you read this chapter quickly, you see a strange story about angels coming down and taking human wives. It feels mythological, but let us apply our engineering lens again. The text identifies these intruders as the sons of God. In the original Hebrew, the B'nai Elohim, these were not humans. These were direct creations of the divine. In our analogy, think of them as high-level system administrators. They were beings with root access to the laws of physics. They understood the code of the universe because they were there when the foundations were laid. But they went rogue. The ancient Book of Enoch describes them as the Watchers. They were assigned to observe the human project, not to interfere with it. They were supposed to monitor the system, not rewrite it. But they looked at the daughters of men, and they saw an opportunity. Many theologians argue this was simply a crime of lust. They say these angels fell in love, but that explanation is too human. It is too small. When a hacker attacks a mainframe, he does not do it because he fell in love with the hard drive. He does it to gain control. These watchers understood a prophecy given back in the garden. They knew that a savior, a Messiah, was destined to be born from the human bloodline. The prophecy said the seed of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. The key word there is seed, genetics. So the strategy changes. If you cannot kill the enemy, you corrupt his supply line. If you can pollute the human genome with foreign DNA, then a pure human Messiah can never be born. This was a code injection attack. The text says they came in unto the daughters of men. This was not marriage. This was an unauthorized merger of two incompatible operating systems. Imagine trying to install software designed for a quantum computer onto a biological hard drive. It does not fit. It breaks the architecture. You are taking the celestial code of an angel, which is immortal and energy-based, and forcing it into the terrestrial code of a human, which is carbon-based. This was a violation of the species barrier. In biology, we have safeguards against this. A dog cannot produce offspring with a cat. The genetic encryption keys do not match, but the Watchers had the keys. They knew how to bypass the encryption. They used their knowledge of universal laws to force a compatibility that should never have existed. They successfully injected their own data into the human source code, and the result was not a human child. It was a glitch, a biological error so severe it threatened to crash the entire planetary system. We know them as the Nephilim, and that is what we need to analyze next. So what happens when you run that corrupted code? You get the Nephilim. In Hebrew, the word comes from the root naphal, which means to fall. They were the fallen ones, the offspring of the crash. The Bible describes them as giants, as mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And this is where it gets confusing for people. We tend to think that if something is corrupted, it should look weak, it should look broken. But in the world of hacking, the most dangerous malware is the kind that looks like a system upgrade. The Nephilim were not weak. By all physical metrics, they were superior. They were stronger than us, faster than us, smarter than us. In engineering terms, they were overclocked. The mixture of angelic energy and human biology created a kind of hybrid vigor. They were high-performance machines, but they were unauthorized executables. You have to ask the difficult question. If they were born of a human mother, but an angelic father, did they have a human soul? Did they have that connection to the divine cloud that Adam was given? The consensus of the ancient writers is no. They were biological shells running on high power, but with no connection to the source. They were soulless. They were like a very advanced AI that has no morality, no empathy, and no conscience. They were simply running a program of domination and consumption. They were glitches in the matrix. They looked like men, but internally, the file structure was completely wrong. And the problem with a glitch of this magnitude is that it never stays isolated. A virus exists to replicate. The text in Genesis makes a very specific and terrifying statement. It says that all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Notice it does not say all people. It says all flesh. This implies the corruption went cross-platform. It moved beyond just humanity. The ancient legends speak of chimeras, mixtures of different animals, strange beasts that defied the laws of nature. It seems these fallen entities were trying to hack the code of every living thing on the planet. Imagine a hard drive that is slowly turning red, sector by sector. The clean, beautiful code that was written in Eden was being overwritten by this jagged, chaotic script. The malware was winning. The human bloodlines were disappearing. The original operating system, the one designed to house the Spirit of God, was being phased out. The entire project of humanity was on the brink of total data loss. If you looked at the world in the days of Noah, you would not see a simple society of sinners. You would see a biosphere in critical system failure. The corruption had reached 99%. The original image was almost gone. There was practically nothing left to save. The Creator was looking at a world that was no longer his. It was a distorted, hacked mirror of reality. And when an operating system is this compromised, when the virus has infected the core kernel, you cannot just run a virus scan. You cannot just delete a few files. There is only one option left for the administrator. You have to pull the plug. This brings us to the flood. For centuries, preachers have shouted about this event as a moment of divine rage. They paint a picture of an angry God punishing people for bad behavior. But that is an emotional interpretation, not a technical one. If you view the world as a compromised system, the flood was not an act of malice. It was an act of preservation. It was a hard reset. In the world of data recovery, we call this a format. When an operating system is 99% infected with malware, you do not try to patch it. You cannot fix it, file by file. The architecture is too unstable. You have to wipe the drive completely and reinstall from a clean source. That is what the water was. It was a universal solvent. It was the formatting tool used to scrub the hard drive of the Earth clean of the Nephilim infection. But for a reset to work, you need a recovery file. You need one piece of data that has remained uncorrupted. Enter Noah. We are often taught that Noah was chosen because he was a nice guy or because he was morally superior. But the text gives us a much more specific reason. It says Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. That word perfect is key. In the original Hebrew, the word is tamim. It implies physical perfection. It is the same word used later in the Bible to describe a sacrificial lamb that has no spots and no blemishes. It does not mean he never sinned. It means he was physically unpolluted. The phrase perfect in his generations refers to his genealogy, his ancestry. Noah was the last man standing whose genetic code had not been hacked by the Watchers. He was the last remnant of the original operating system. In a world of hybrids and errors, Noah was the only one still running pure human DNA. He was the last clean backup file available on the server. If God had not acted, the human line would have been completely overwritten, and the interface for the Messiah would have been lost. So the command was given to build the ark. Think of the ark not just as a boat, but as a quarantine zone. It was a sealed environment designed to keep the clean data separate from the corruption while the wipe occurred. It was a USB recovery drive floating on a sea of chaos. Inside that vessel, the genetic information of humanity and the animal kingdom was stored in a suspended state. Outside, the system was being purged. The waters broke open from the deep and fell from the sky, dismantling the civilization of the giants, erasing the glitch and burying the evidence of the breach under miles of sediment. The hard drive was spinning down. The screen went black. The old world, the hacked world, was deleted. And for a moment, there was silence. The system was ready to reboot. When the waters receded and the ark touched ground, the system rebooted. The hard drive had been wiped. The malware was gone. But any good engineer knows that you cannot simply restart the machine and walk away. If you reinstall the exact same operating system with the exact same vulnerabilities, the hackers will just break in again. The system needed an upgrade. It needed a security patch. If you look at the data immediately following the flood, you see a drastic change in the metrics of humanity, specifically the runtime. Before the flood, the patriarchs lived for nearly a millennium. Adam lived 930 years. Methuselah lived 969 years. These biological machines were designed for extreme longevity. But after the flood, that number crashes. It drops to 600, then 400, then 200, until finally, it stabilizes around 120 years. Theologians often view this as a tragic loss of vitality, but look at it as a security protocol. In computing, the longer a session runs, the more errors accumulate in the memory. If a corrupted program is allowed to run for 1,000 years, the damage it can do is exponential. But if you force a restart every 80 or 100 years, you limit the spread of the infection. God introduced a mandatory session timeout. He shortened the human lifespan to prevent the level of corruption from ever reaching critical mass again. It was a firewall installed directly into our biology. By limiting the time a human consciousness stays active on the server, you limit the amount of damage they can do to the source code. This was patch 2.0, but there was a greater purpose for this stability. The goal was not just to prevent another crash. The goal was to deploy the fix. The entire operating system of history was running a background process, waiting for the right moment to execute the final command, the extraction of the corrupted code and the restoration of the original image. This is what we call the Messiah. For the Messiah to be born, there had to be a protected, clean line of code running through history. From Noah to Abraham, to David, and finally to Mary. This lineage had to be shielded from the genetic tampering of the Watchers. This is why the laws of the Old Testament seem so strict about clean and unclean, about who marries whom. It was not about racism or tribalism. It was biosecurity. It was a quarantine protocol designed to protect the integrity of the hardware so that the antivirus could be uploaded. The birth of Christ was the moment the original, uncorrupted file was reintroduced to the system. The second Adam, a man with the full, perfect coding of the Golden Master, but inserted directly into the infected network to rewrite it from the inside out. However, the question remains, did the patch work perfectly? Or are there still back doors in the system? Because if you look closely at the texts, even after the flood, there were reports of giants, the Anakim, Goliath. It seems some residual files survived the wipe. Some cached data remained hidden in the deep corners of the hard drive. And as we look at the modern world, as we begin to toy with our own genetics again, one has to wonder, are we accidentally disabling the firewall that was put in place to save us? We are now living in a time where the ancient and the futuristic are starting to blur. For thousands of years, the human genome was a locked box. We could look at it, we could study it, but we could not change it. That we could not change it. The admin privileges were revoked. But today, that has changed. We have entered the age of CRISPR and synthetic biology. We have built tools that allow us to cut, paste, and rewrite the very source code of life. We are curing diseases, which is noble, but we are also talking about designer babies. We are talking about enhancing human strength, intelligence, and longevity. We are trying to upgrade the hardware ourselves, but you have to ask yourself, is this scientific progress, or is this a security breach? By unlocking the kernel of our own DNA, are we reopening the same back door that the Watchers used thousands of years ago? Are we lowering the firewall that was put in place to protect us? The ancient texts warned us that the end times would be as in the days of Noah. Most people think that means wickedness, but maybe it means technology. Maybe it means we will once again try to merge our own code with things that do not belong in the human system. We might be standing on the verge of the next great system crash, and this time, there might not be an ark. But the story of engineering the divine doesn't end here. There is another event in the ancient logs where humanity tried to hack the heavens, not with biology, but with architecture. If you want me to decode the Tower of Babel, not as a tall building, but as a failed attempt to build a quantum network to storm the gates of heaven, comment System failure down below. I'm the Sacred Path Engineer.